Hey, everyone, welcome to Radio 28. The weather is dry, so be careful with fire. The old friend went home and pedestrians gave way. This is an English translation of one of the corpse herding incantations used by corpse herders in Xiangxi, China. There's this thing called corpse herding. Xiangxi is known for three kinds of witchcraft: corpse herding, voodoo curses, and the falling flower cave women. And of the three, corpse herding is considered the most powerful. Back in 1994, a Hong Kong film crew went all the way to Xiangxi to make a movie about their local custom of corpse herding. But when Huang Yongyu, a famous painter from Xiangxi, found out, he wrote a pretty strong letter to the film company owner and got them to scrap the whole project. Huang Yongyu's letter had this line that really made people think, "Please don't let the world misunderstand this land we're trying to develop." It makes you wonder, is corpse herding a mysterious cultural tradition, or just a bunch of superstitious nonsense? Today, we're going to dive into the truth behind corpse herding in Xiangxi. Corpse herding, also known as moving the spirit, is basically about moving a dead person's body or soul to another place. It sounds pretty unbelievable, right? But it's actually a significant part of Chinese witchcraft culture. Back when science wasn't so advanced, people generally believed that witch doctors could talk to the gods. Whether they were witches or doctors, they were highly respected figures. When you talk about corpse herding, the most famous place that comes up is Xiangxi. Xiangxi is in the northwest of Hunan province today. It's said that in ancient times, battlefields there were covered with corpses and flowing with blood. In Chinese legends, the hero Qiyu saw his people dying far from home and was heartbroken. He asked his military advisor to find a way to bring their bodies back home. The advisor had a plan. He dressed up as Qiyu, stood among the bones, and chanted a spell. Before long, the bones lying on the ground stood up and followed the advisor, who was carrying a big flag, on the road home. Of course, this is just an ancient myth, and we can't really know if it's true. Another theory is that it originated sometime during China's Qing dynasty, roughly between 1636 and 1912. Looking at the geography, Xiangxi is located on the Yunnan-Guizhou Plateau, with towering mountains and rugged terrain. It's super hard to travel by car or horse, so trying to transport a dead person back to Xiangxi by land was a nightmare and cost a fortune. Compared to all that, corpse herding was a much better option. It was basically having someone lead the body back on foot. No need for cars, horses, or boats, which meant it was way cheaper. That's why it became the go-to way for many people in Xiangxi to bring their loved ones home after they passed away. Not just anyone could become a corpse herder. The requirements to learn this unique skill were incredibly strict. Corpse herding was a profession where you dealt with dead people your whole life, which even in modern times is considered unlucky. So, corpse herders usually came from poor families. To become one, you had to meet at least 3 conditions. You had to be brave. This is pretty obvious, right? If you're a scaredy cat, you're not going to last long in this job. Sometimes, to test potential students, the master corpse herder would leave a tung tree leaf on a grave in the deep mountains and make the student go get it in the middle of the night. If they could bring it back, they passed the test. You had to have a good sense of direction. The master would have the student look at the sun, then spin them around until they were dizzy, and then suddenly stop them and ask them to point out north, south, east, and west. If they couldn't do it, it meant they had a bad sense of direction and would easily get lost at night, so they were immediately rejected. Third, you had to be in good physical shape. Corpse herders walked dozens of miles every day, often on rough mountain roads. If you weren't physically fit, you wouldn't make it. There were also rumors that corpse herders had to be ugly so that people would avoid them. A good corpse herder supposedly couldn't marry or have kids, so their journey would go smoothly. It all sounds pretty creepy. Meeting those requirements just meant you were qualified to start learning. To become a real corpse herder, you had to master the 36 skills of corpse herding. The first skill was standing, which was the ability to make a corpse stand up. The second was walking, which was the ability to make a dead person walk. Then there were skills like turning, going downhill, and crossing bridges, which were all about making the corpse move smoothly in different terrains. There was also this special skill called taming wild dogs. When you were herding corpses and came across wild dogs, you had to be able to calm them down immediately so they wouldn't disturb the dead. And the most unbelievable skill was reviving the spirit. Corpse herders would use a special xiangxi herbal spray on the body to try and bring the spirit back to life. People believed that a person had 3 souls and 7 spirits, and the more souls you could bring back, the lighter and more agile the corpse would be. Corpse herders also had 2 secret weapons, Qinzhou talismans and cinnabar dust, which were said to ward off evil spirits. Qinzhou talismans came from Qinzhou, which is now around Huaihua in Hunan province. They're also called spirit talismans, or peachwood talismans, and people still use them in some folk activities today. Qinzhou talismans are usually drawn on yellow paper or cinnabar paper, and there are at least 150 different designs. They're mostly made up of symbols and Chinese characters that represent people, heads, birds, and beasts. It's said that if a corpse herder sticks a Qinzhou talisman on the dead person's forehead, it can hold their souls in place and prevent them from turning into a zombie. Cinnabar dust is basically just ground cinnabar, which is a bright red mineral. It's also used in Chinese medicine. You can take it to calm your nerves and clear away heat and toxins, and you can use it on your skin to kill bacteria and parasites, which helps prevent the body from decaying. In traditional Chinese witchcraft, cinnabar is also believed to have protective powers against evil. Before they start herding the corpses, the corpse herder will chant some spells and then stuff cinnabar into the dead person's eyes, ears, nose, and also rub it on their forehead, chest, hands, and feet. After that, they stick the Qinzhou talisman on their forehead. They do all this to keep the souls from leaving the body. Corpse herders usually lived like regular farmers, working in the fields during the day and resting at night. Only when they got a job would they dress up and go corpse herding. People who knew what was up would always ask politely before hiring a corpse herder, "Master, can you take a stroll?" It was a respectful way to ask and also avoided using unlucky words. If the corpse herder agreed, they would write the dead person's name, date of birth and death, and gender on a piece of paper and carry it with them. They were very particular about when they would travel, usually going out at night and resting during the day. They wouldn't go through towns, they would stick to remote mountains and trails. It makes sense, right? Can you imagine seeing a bunch of dead bodies walking through the city in broad daylight? People would freak out. Corpse herders were also really careful about keeping animals like cats and dogs away from the bodies. If the body got damaged, they wouldn't be able to explain it to the family. Corpse herders usually didn't use lanterns. Instead, they carried a copper bell called a soul summoning bell. When you heard that bell ringing in the mountains, even the chickens, dogs, and wild animals would stay quiet and out of the way. According to the locals in Xiangxi, the bell would guide the souls of the dead back home so they wouldn't get lost and become wandering ghosts. Long before the corpse herder arrived at their destination, the family of the deceased would have everything ready: clothes, a coffin, the whole shebang. As soon as the body arrived, they would immediately dress it in its burial clothes and get it ready for the coffin. The entire process was handled by the corpse herder, and according to the rules of the trade, nobody else was allowed to interfere or even watch. They said it was to avoid disturbing the dead and risking something bad happening. Once the body was dressed and everything was ready, the family could finally come and take their loved one home. When they opened the coffin lid, the person's face and hair looked just like they did yesterday. At this point, the family members would usually start wailing and crying uncontrollably. The corpse herders would comfort them, saying things like, "Don't be too sad, you don't want to make the deceased uneasy." It's a blessing that they were able to return home safely, thanks to the good deeds they did in their lifetime. Before the corpse herder set off, the family would give them half of the agreed-upon payment. Once they arrived at the destination and the body was in the coffin, they would pay the rest of the money. That's how a corpse herding job was completed. But corpse herders didn't just take any job. They had a 3 accepts, 3 rejects rule. They'd take cases where someone was beheaded, hanged, or died in a cage. They believed these people didn't die willingly, so their souls were still attached to the living world, missing their homes and families. In these cases, the corpse herder could use magic to call back their souls, seal them in the bodies, and then take them home. But on the other hand, they wouldn't touch people who died from illness, drowning, hanging themselves, or those who died in fires or from lightning strikes. They also wouldn't take bodies that were missing limbs. They believed these people's souls had already gone to the underworld, and trying to bring them back would bring down the wrath of the heavens. It was like messing with fate, and they didn't want any part of that. It's worth mentioning that corpse herding was really limited to a small area, mainly the greater Xiangxi region. Legend has it that these areas were part of the Miao people's ancestral ghost country, and if you went any further, the magic wouldn't work. The corpse herders wouldn't be able to move the bodies anymore, but the real reason behind this might be that only in the greater Xiangxi area were there special inns for corpse herders to rest. And only people in that area knew about the little gong that corpse herders used, so they knew to avoid them. Corpse herding trips could take days, even half a month, so having places to rest along the way was essential, usually before daybreak. The corpse herders would check into these special inns that didn't take regular guests. They'd sleep during the day and then hit the road again at night. If there was bad weather or the roads were really rough, they might have to stay at the inn for several days in a row. These inns were pretty strange. There was no owner, no staff, and the doors were always open, but nobody worried about thieves. I mean, who would dare to steal from a place like that? Each room had a space behind the door for the corpses to rest. The corpse herders would clean up the inn and leave it ready for the next group before they moved on. Regarding corpse herding, the Miao writer Shen Kongguan once wrote in an early article that when you pass through Qinzhou, which is now called Yuanling, you can find cinnabar there, and there are people who know how to herd corpses. If you are lucky, you might even see a group of dead bodies walking down the road. And what's even weirder, they'll move to the side of the road when cars get close, just like living people. Years ago, CCTV even made a documentary about corpse herding. In it, an old Miao woman named Wu Fengying, who lived in Xiangxi, said that when she was a kid, she actually saw dead people walking back home. The person was wearing white clothes and a bamboo hat, with their arms hanging down. When they got home, the corpse herder took off their hat, and the body just fell to the ground. Besides corpse herding, there was also this other type of witchcraft called shuyuke. The practitioner would draw a talisman, stick it on the dead person's forehead, chant a spell, and then shake a soul-summoning bell. The dead person would then follow them. The Zhuyuku practitioner would walk with the dead person, or people, until dawn. Then, they would have to find a Zhuyuku practitioner's place to stay for the day. As soon as the dead person walked in the door, they would prop them up against the door. It was crucial not to let them lie down. If they lay down, the magic would be broken, and they wouldn't be able to move the next night. So, there was this thing called shuyuke, which was like a type of traditional Chinese medicine. It had its roots in witchcraft, and instead of using needles or medicine, they would try to heal people by explaining the cause of their illness. It's said that back during the Second Sino-Japanese War, there were even shops in Chongqing that offered corpse herding services. They'd have a sign hanging outside that said something like Zhuyuke, specializing in difficult illnesses, offering corpse transportation services. From these records and interviews, you can see that corpse herding wasn't just some made-up urban legend. It was a real folk craft. But how did they actually do it? Was there really some kind of magic that could make dead bodies walk? To try and figure out what was really going on, a reporter went to Hunan province based on some rumors and tried to find the last remaining corpse herder in Xiangxi. According to the rumors, the last corpse herder lived in International Peace Village in Zhejiang County. The reporter asked some villagers, "Have you ever heard of corpse herding?" And they'd say things like, "Corpse herding? I've never heard of that. I've only seen it on TV." The reporter kept asking around and finally found someone who knew something. This person told the reporter that their grandpa had said that corpse herders usually worked at night, and they couldn't tell anyone about it, so most people never found out about it. With the villagers' help, the reporter finally met the legendary corpse herder, Tian Tiewu. Born in Yuanling City, Hunan Province, in 1974, Tian Tiewu is a native of Xiangxi. His grandfather and uncle were both corpse herders. But with the times changing, corpse herding is no longer needed. Tian Tiewu is now the head of a performance troupe that specializes in witch dance and other local performance arts. When the reporter met him, they got straight to the point and asked, "Can you herd corpses?" Tian Tiewu said yes. The reporter followed up, "Are you sure? Can you really herd corpses?" Tian Tiewu replied, "Yes, yes. We still go to villages sometimes to perform rituals and other traditional ceremonies, but we don't really do corpse herding anymore. It's a thing of the past now." Then, Tian Tiewu told the reporter a story about his grandfather and uncle's corpse herding experiences. It was in the fall of 1939. Tian Qizhang, Tian Tiewu's grandfather, led over 100 soldiers from his hometown to the battlefield in Hubei. But after a battle, more than 80 of them were killed. Before they left, Tian Qizhang had promised the villagers that after the war, he would bring all his brothers back home, safe and sound. To keep that promise, Tian Qizhang, along with his eldest son, Tian Tiewu's uncle, Tian Yilin, and a few other corpse herders, brought the bodies of those fallen soldiers back to Xiangxi. Tian Tiewu said that his uncle, Tian Yilin, didn't have any children. To make sure the corpse herding skills weren't lost, he passed them on to Tian Tiewu. When Tian Tiewu was learning corpse herding as a kid, he just thought it was cool and fun. It wasn't until he grew up that he realized the deep cultural significance behind it. Tian Tiewu's story really piqued the reporter's interest. But when the reporter asked Tian Tiewu to show them how corpse herding works, he refused without even thinking about it. This made people wonder if he even knew how to do it in the first place. I mean, Tian Tiewu looks so honest and down to earth. He's nothing like the image of a mystical, otherworldly corpse herder that we have in our heads, but then Tian Tiewu explained that he couldn't demonstrate it because he was missing one crucial thing, a corpse. These days, if someone dies far from home, their family usually cremates them and brings the ashes back. And even if they wanted to bring the body back, with modern transportation, there's no need for corpse herding anymore. Tian Tiewu made a good point. Just when the reporter was about to give up and leave, Tian Tiewu surprised them by saying that if they really wanted to see it, he could demonstrate the corpse herding techniques without using a real body. He explained that he didn't want this tradition to die out with him, so he hoped to record it on camera for future generations. The reporters were thrilled. That night, Tian Tiewu brought his tools and put on a performance in the woods behind the village. He wore a Taoist robe, and his apprentices wore straw hats that covered their faces, with talismans stuck on their foreheads. According to Tian Tiewu, the main purpose of these talismans was actually to prevent insect bites. The talismans that were stuck on the exposed parts of the body, like the face, were meant to keep mosquitoes and flies away from those areas. So, it turns out that these so-called magic talismans were actually just bug repellent. Then, Tian Tiewu's apprentices grabbed two long, black bamboo poles and held them out to their sides. In real corpse herding, they would tie the dead person's arms to these poles. The poles had to be painted black so that people wouldn't see them in the dark and get freaked out. It's also why people think the corpses are walking by themselves, because the poles are hidden in the dark. Since bamboo is flexible, when the corpse herders carried the body, it would kind of bounce up and down. This made it look like the hopping zombies you see in Hong Kong movies. According to Tian Tiewu, they usually set off around midnight and walked until about 4 in the morning, covering about 15 to 20 miles in one night. With someone leading the way and someone guarding the back, they could finish a job in a few days. Hearing this, the reporter had a question. Now that Tian Tiewu is the only corpse herder left, does that mean corpse herding is completely gone? Tian Tiewu said that a corpse herder could still take on jobs, but it would be a bit unconventional. They would have to chop the body into several pieces, replace the torso with straw, and only keep the head and limbs. The corpse herder would carry the body parts on their back, covered by a big robe. When they arrived at the destination, since the encoffining was handled entirely by the corpse herder and no one else was allowed to watch, the family wouldn't realize that the body was incomplete. But this method was only used as a last resort, because it was considered very disrespectful to the deceased. Wu Shuguang, a professor at Jishou University in Hunan and an expert on Miao history, suspects that the special potion they used might have contained cinnabar and mercury. He believes that the real secret of corpse herding wasn't just making the bodies walk, but how they kept them from rotting. He thinks that they probably had some kind of formula that could keep the bodies from decaying or getting stiff. For example, if you add some cinnabar, especially if you mix it with a little bit of cement, or steam the body with cement, it kind of coats the body and creates a protective layer. So, the transportation itself was probably less important than the preservation. Tian Tiawu said that the anti-decay potion used by corpse herders was the biggest secret of the trade. According to the rules passed down from their ancestors, he couldn't reveal the recipe to anyone. So, it seems like the mystery of corpse herding is solved, right? But were corpse herders really just strong guys who carried bodies? Was all that talk about magic and the 36 skills of corpse herding just made up? Earlier, we mentioned Wu Fengying, the old Miao woman from Xiangxi. In the documentary, she also told another strange story from her childhood. She said that after an old person in her village died, their family couldn't find the silver jewelry that the person always wore. So, they called a corpse herder. The corpse herder spit some kind of magic water on the body, and the body suddenly sat up. It didn't say anything, but it pointed to where the jewelry was hidden. When I was gathering information, I also found out that Tian Tiawu had performed a rooster resurrection ritual on another TV show. Roosters are traditionally believed to have a special connection to the spiritual world, and people often used them in ancestor worship and other rituals. The day of the show's filming happened to be the day a new drum tower was being completed in a village in Xiangxi. According to tradition, the villagers would invite a shaman to perform a big ceremony that day, and Tian Tiawu was the shaman they invited. After burning incense, praying to the heavens, and blowing the cow horn, Tian Tiawu took out the rooster he had prepared. He held the rooster up and made offerings in different directions, chanting and making gestures over the rooster. Then, he took out a long nail and pinned the rooster to a wooden platform. The rooster didn't struggle at all. At that moment, Tian Tiawu made a gesture toward the rooster, and suddenly, the rooster flapped its wings and jumped down. Then, Tian Tiawu took out another rooster, cut its throat, and also pinned it to the platform. The reporter even set off firecrackers next to the rooster, but it didn't react at all. After that, Tian Tiawu chanted a few spells, took a mouthful of water, and spit it on the rooster. Then, he tossed the rooster into the air. Amazingly, the rooster flapped its wings and landed on the ground unharmed. The reporters weren't convinced and thought Tian Tiawu might have tricked them somehow. So, they went to the market and bought a few more chickens. But the result was the same every time. Tian Tiawu's rooster resurrection trick worked perfectly. However, Tian Tiawu did say that the chickens that had been used in the ritual, even though they were temporarily revived, mostly didn't live for very long. They usually died within 4 or 5 hours. But the thing is, Tian Tiawu didn't really hold the rooster's head down during the ritual. And experts say that the most important thing when you're hypnotizing a chicken is to handle it gently. You're supposed to stroke its chest to make it feel safe, and then gently lay it down. And you have to be really, really careful how you lay it down, so it feels comfortable. That's how it's supposed to work. But in Tian Tiawu's ritual, he definitely wasn't gentle, and the rooster was definitely not comfortable being nailed to that platform. Even though Tian Tiawu's the last corpse herder around, he's not bummed. He's teaching his apprentices so the tradition doesn't die out. He's even turned corpse herding into a stage show. I think it's less about superstition and more about a disappearing tradition. It's about that deep Chinese feeling of wanting to go home, even after you're gone, and corpse herders helping those souls find peace. Alright, that's it for this one. Catch you later. If you liked the video, hit that like button and subscribe. Let's keep the conversation going in the comments below. See you next time.